Welcome to the 311 Griffin YouTube channel. We're talking about the YF-12 mod by VSN. This thing seems to be all the rage now. A lot of people talking about it, and I've seen some videos already popping up on the tubes. Some of those videos, as always, seem to suggest that we can get a lot of real-world data from this mod, and not trying to knock the mod at all, but that's just not going to happen. This is an exciting mod because the SR-71 is just an amazing plane, and I think everybody loves the SR-71, A-12, YF-12. It's one of the most advanced aircraft of all time. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the technology on the plane, but not much. This isn't meant to be an in-depth technical study because, after all, this is a mod that's a pretty simple, what I would call a pseudo-realistic mod at best. On the real aircraft, it's, if you have the time and you haven't studied it yet, it's a great study on efficiency, problem solving, and teamwork. And the Skunk Works teams were legendary, obviously, in what they did. But they solved a lot of problems on this thing for problems that really mattered, and they came up with, you know, kind of quick band-aid fixes, it seems like, on things that didn't matter as much, that they just had to kind of smaller hurdles they had to get over. So they wound up creating what I consider to be the most incredible jet of all time. This thing is just absolutely fantastic in so many ways. It's not a do-it-all jet, as it turns out, but it's a pretty slick jet that was way ahead of its time. So I'm going to be negative in a couple of points on this mod, and I don't mean them to be super negative. I know it's a VSN mod. I know it's a free mod. It's meant to be eye candy. To be, like I said, at best a pseudo-realistic kind of a mod for people to play around with. And so I appreciate the work that VSN has done. I appreciate the work that has happened on this mod, and I like the mod. It's a really cool thing. So I want to be clear about that, but when I say negative things, it's going to be like, well, I wish in a perfect world that we could have this or that, or I wish it did this, or I wish this was more realistic. So it's just a slight letdown that what we have here is a modified F-15 wrapped in a new dress, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. I'm not super upset about that. I just want to point it out so that if anybody watches this video and they're thinking, oh sweet, there's an SR-71 in DCS, that they know that they're not going to get an in-depth look at an SR-71. That's what I want to make sure of. So the external model of this thing is, it's an SR-71. It's not a YF-12. It's actually an SR-71, or closer to it than a YF-12. It isn't a YF-12. We'll talk about that first, because the YF-12 had modified chines at the front, towards the nose, to make room for the AN/APG-18 radar, fire control radar. It also had some IRST sensors in the front of the chines. Because of the chines, it changed the aerodynamics enough that they had to put some strakes or some fins on the bottom of the fuselage and the engine nacelles, and the SR-71 doesn't have those. So this is very clearly not a YF-12. It is an SR-71 for all intents and purposes. So other than that, there are some details on the model that I wish were there. Or actually some moving stuff. There's a lot of doors on the engine nacelles to control air and to handle air. And I didn't expect those to move. And I'm also not going to show at every regime of flight what I saw. They don't move. I'll put it that way. They don't move. The spikes don't retract. The nozzles don't really change based on speed. They call those the ejector doors. They don't really change based on speed. They change based on engine settings, which is more akin to our normal fighter jets. So you've got bleed air doors, you've got suck-in doors, you've got tertiary doors, you've got centerline doors, feed doors, I think, or something like that. I can't remember exactly what they're called. And you've got the spike itself. All that stuff should move, but it doesn't. As for the internal model, it is an F-15 internal model. So model-wise, it's good on the exterior. Wish there were some more details. I'm not sad there's not more details because again, this is eye candy. It's an SR-70. It's a free SR-71 mod for DCS so that we can look at it, incorporate it in our missions, have it in the background, use it if you want, whatever. Not a big deal. As for weapons and radar usage and things like that, I'm not really getting into that in this video because this aircraft was not intended to be that. You can do that in DCS, but it is not. It's not realistic at all. You get further and further away from realism. It wouldn't use the right missiles. The SR-71 was a reconnaissance aircraft. The YF-12 was going to be a high-speed interceptor of sorts, and it did fire some missiles in real life, but that's just something I'm not going to play with in DCS because it's not even close to real. And I can't even pretend. It gets to the point where I can't pretend it's real anymore if I'm firing even AIM-7s from this. So I didn't really do any testing on the missiles and stuff. I hope people aren't too upset about that. I do want to talk about the weights. I thought that these were wrong because I was looking at SR-71 weights, and you can't get this thing light enough to be I believe the SR-71's landing weight is like less than what the no fuel weight is here in DCS, and then the total weight is way lower on the YF-12 than the SR-71. So the weights looked really off, but these are close to YF-12 weights. Now let's talk about performance. This thing was known for being a high fast flyer, and it is. It seems a little bit sluggish at high speed, at high altitude. I did get it over 100,000 feet. I have a confession to make. I'm not at all patient at trying to fly high. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And normally in real life, if you're doing a high altitude, high speed flight in any aircraft, it requires you to take off, and it requires you to refuel in the air, and it requires a lot of time and a crap ton of fuel. And this is true of the MiG-31. And this is one of the reasons why in the modern age these kinds of jets aren't really worth it. It's part of why the SR-71 is not a thing anymore. As much as that hurts, it's not a thing because it takes too much time, energy, and fuel to get that high and that fast. So low speed or low altitude, this thing actually I think performs closer in terms of speeds to the real thing, because this thing didn't really go that fast down close to the earth. It turns a lot better than I thought it would. It turned like a modified F-15 might turn. Turned very much like an F-15 might turn. So I did some loops with it. It looks really cool doing tight turns and things like that. But I'm not for sure. I think that these were prohibited maneuvers in the real thing. So I did some barrel rolls, I did some loops, I did some aileron, some not very good aileron rolls. I kind of am terrible at those. I tried to do a kind of a stall turn, I guess you'd call it. It kind of did it. I think you could do it, but with these fidgety FC3 mods, they're all really fidgety. At least the way I have my controls set up, and so it's hard for me to point the aircraft straight up in the air. But essentially, I turned, and I've got some tac view of this, but I turned this thing, I think, at like 23 degrees per minute, or 23 degrees per second turn rate, and the turn radius I got well below 1,500 feet. Sustainable. I'm pretty sure this thing, the way the mod is built, it can sustain a 15 to 18 degree per second turn, and somewhere in the neighborhood of a 2,000 foot radius. Those are rough guesses based on what I was seeing in tac view. I also did some, I forced a kind of a flat spin just to see what it would do. I like to do that in aircraft. This thing, the engines are so far apart that I think one way or the other you could get out of a flat spin if you had the altitude pretty easily. I don't know how it performed in real life. Flat spins were a prohibited maneuver. Um, so you really weren't supposed to try them. But I did a couple. One of them wasn't bad at all, and I reversed the rudders just right away, and it stopped. The second one, I held it a little bit deeper. This is the second one, and then I reversed the rudders, and it slowed down. It took it a minute. You can see in a lot of these external views where I'm doing weird stuff with the plane, you can see the fidgetiness and how it kind of rides on rails, as they say, as these free mods often do. My best altitude flight, though, I did. Well, the highest I got was over 100,000 feet. I don't know my Mach number because I wasn't really paying attention. There was a flight where I did it a little bit more realistically, and I just flew to the south end of the map from Groom Lake. And then I turned, it was like a 60-mile turn diameter, which isn't big enough. And then I flew back to the north end of the map, and I almost got to Mach 2.5, but I was flying steadily level above 80,000 feet, which I think is a lot more realistic. So, as far as the upper atmosphere kind of performance stuff goes, I do think that it's probably closer than it seems like. And one thing I do want to point out for those that may not know, you really have to look at your true airspeed up high because it's going to look like you're not going very fast at all. But you're going pretty fast. The indicated airspeed is kind of the way your plane's flying based on pressure, so you're not going to be able to go. So you're, as far as your plane is flying is concerned, you really are going 250 knots. And you're not going to be able to go much slower than that. But in reality, over the ground, or in relation to the density of the air and the air movement and all that kind of stuff, you're actually moving lickety split. And I guess that brings up another point as far as the performance goes at altitude. As far as I can tell from the flight manual, you're never supposed to get below 310 knots indicated, I think is what they're saying. But I couldn't keep it at 310. I was almost always between 200 and 300 at best. So I probably was flying the plane incorrectly, but I think it's also slightly off, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about landings specifically, because landings are difficult in this, and I did some time researching the flight manual just to kind of see what they did in real life after I had a bunch of crashed landings. I felt like these landings were okay. Some of them I did have my nose a little high, but every stinking time the gear crumpled and it caught on fire. And I don't think it's a very realistic thing, and it's kind of tough to do. And also it rides the rails, as you can see. As you touch down, it kind of like whips your plane around and stuff like that. So in real life, you were supposed to land between 10 and 12 AOA. And you can see there, I'd buy that was a tail strike in that particular scene. You were never supposed to exceed 14 degrees AOA. And quite a few of my landings I felt were sufficiently good. Now, I don't know what speed you're supposed to land at, but I was trying to land below 150, and this one I thought was okay, and then I heard a bump, and I looked back, and I wasn't really paying attention, and I don't know what the bumps were all about, but this thing landed on the ground just fine for a little bit. And I thought, whoa, that's going to break it, but the plane's still rolling. It's not on fire. Not a good landing. So what I finally did is I just came in a little bit fast and a little bit kind of lower. And then I kind of flew it lightly onto the racetrack, and it worked fine. It landed fine. So yeah, my best landing was at higher speeds. It wound up being slightly below 200 indicated, which is a little bit scary. Like but I was on this long runway at Groom Lake, the one that's not really used anymore, and should have a bunch of cracks and be really rough, but it's not. And I'm happy for that, because my brakes didn't work, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this worked, just coming in flatter. So I'm wondering if I could do that at a lower speed. For now, if I need to land this or I want to land it, I'll just land it a little bit faster and come in a little bit flatter. So there you go. No chance of a tail strike there. The thing does, like I like to aero brake, and so doing that, there's a lot of surface area on this. So I just kind of held the stick back slightly, and the nose just wouldn't seem to come down, and I wasn't slowing down at all. And so I started kind of pumping it a little bit, just trying to get the nose up a little higher, but not too high. And right there you can see I'm still flying the plane basically. And it didn't seem to slow down very much at all, which, it was built for speed. So I started steering back and forth, and man, like I had quite a bit of rudder authority, considering my nose wheel isn't down, which maybe it would in real life. I don't know. It just seemed odd. So then I kind of let the nose come down and turned a little bit. My wheel brakes were not doing anything. I did a later test on those, and I can't get the wheel brakes to work, the axes. I need to look and see if there's another axis. Sometimes on these mods they'll add an axis for one reason or another, just to kind of get around some limitations they're running into, and I need to look and see if there are other axes. I did hit the W key, which does work, and then I did a ground loop just because I wanted to turn back around. I had to hit this exit to not run off the end of the runway anyway. And finally, I messed around with differential thrust, pulling the throttle on one engine back to idle while the other's in afterburner, and then swapping them. That works as you would expect. These engines are far apart and they provide a lot of thrust, so it does yaw the aircraft pretty substantially. You could steer that way if you needed to. The only issue is that the wrong engine shows an afterburner. I discovered that while doing this test. So if you have your right engine in idle and your left engine in full afterburner, the right engine's going to show the afterburner, and vice versa. You will yaw the correct direction, but the wrong afterburner is lit on the model, if that makes sense. Not a huge deal. It was just kind of funny and surprising and confused me at first. But anyway, the differential thrust works on the model as you would expect. That's about it. That's all I tested. Again, great model. I'm glad it's here. I'm glad it's in DCS. It is an SR-71, not a YF-12 in reality, as far as the external model goes. And it's not super detailed. It's not super realistic, but that's okay. It's fun to fly around, and you do have the capability of flying pretty high and pretty fast if you want. So it's fun. I would recommend getting it. It's not a huge download. Doesn't take a lot of time to install. I can help people install it if they want, but it's like most other mods. Users, save games, DCS, mods, aircraft. Slap it in there. You should be good to go. As always, thanks for watching. Enjoy. Happy flying.